It is sometime around midnight, in a forest clearing near the banks of the Naranjara River, and a man is sitting in the dirt beneath a fig tree. He has not eaten a full meal in weeks. His body is thin, not the golden, serene figure you have seen in statues. Those came later. Tonight he is gaunt, exhausted, 35 years old, and he has made a decision that is either the bravest or the most foolish thing a human being can do. He has decided not to move until he understands why people suffer. His name is Siddhartha Gautama. He is not yet the Buddha. He is not yet anything. He is just a man in the dark, watching his own mind. And what he sees in the middle watch of that night, roughly midnight to 4 in the morning, is not a vision, not a god, not a beam of light descending from the heavens. What he sees is a chain, 12 links, each one triggering the next, running forward from a kind of blindness he will later call avidya, avidya, a not seeing so fundamental you do not know you are not seeing, through layers of reaction, sensation grasping, and becoming all the way to aging, sickness, death, and grief. And then the 12th link feeds back into the first, a circle closed spinning. He traces it forward. He traces it backward. He watches it assemble, suffering the way a machine assembles a product on a factory line, automatically, without anyone choosing, without anyone even noticing the parts clicking into place. And when he sees the full circle, he understands something that will become the most important teaching he ever gives. More important than the Four Noble Truths. More important than the Eightfold Path. He will later tell his closest student that this single teaching is so deep, so deceptive in its complexity, that failing to understand it is the reason human beings cannot find their way out of suffering. We will get to what he found at the end of that chain. We will get to the one link, just one, where the entire machine can be stopped. But first, you need to understand why you reached for your phone this morning, before your eyes were fully open, because that automatic reach, that grab you did not choose, that pull towards something before you were even conscious enough to want it, that is the chain. Running right now in you. This is not a philosophy lecture. This is not a list of 12 things to memorize for a Buddhism exam. This is not about what happens after you die, or how the universe recycles souls. This is about what happened in the last argument you had, the one you had already had 40 times before. This is about the diet you started and broke, the relationship you went back to, the thing you said you would never do again, and then did again last Tuesday. You have a pattern. You know you have a pattern, and knowing has not been enough to stop it. The Buddha knew why. He mapped it link by link, 2,500 years before neuroscience confirmed the mechanism. A man sitting under a tree in northern India built the most precise diagnostic tool ever created for the human mind. It is called paticca samuppada, patiksha samuppada, dependent origination. And it is not what you think it is. Most people who encounter this teaching see a diagram on a monastery wall, a wheel with 12 sections, painted demons, symbolic animals. It looks like cosmology, like metaphysics, like something for monks and scholars to argue about in rooms you will never enter. The Buddha thought it was the single most practical thing he ever discovered. And tonight, you are going to see why he was right. Start with a mistake, not yours, Ananda's. Ananda was the Buddha's personal attendant for 25 years. He was there for nearly every teaching, every conversation, every question a confused monk or grieving widow or hostile philosopher ever threw at the Buddha. He heard it all, and he remembered it all. Tradition says he had something close to perfect recall. After the Buddha's death, It was Ananda who recited the teachings from memory so they could be preserved. Every sutta that begins with "Thus have I heard," that I is Ananda. So when the Buddha sat down one day and began teaching dependent origination, this chain of 12 links, this architecture of suffering, Ananda listened. And when the Buddha finished, Ananda said something that any good student might say. He said, "It is wonderful, Venerable Sir. This dependent origination, it appears deep, but it is actually clear to me." The Buddha turned to him, and what he said next is one of the sharpest corrections in the entire Pali Canon. "Don't say that. Ananda, don't say that." He did not say it gently. The repetition tells you something. The man who had memorized every word the Buddha ever spoke, the man closer to the teaching than any living person, had just looked at the most important map the Buddha ever drew and said, "I get it," and the Buddha told him twice that he did not. This dependent origination is deep, and it appears deep. It is through not understanding, not penetrating this teaching, that this generation has become like a tangled ball of string, like a matted bird's nest, like a field of reeds, and finds no way out. A tangled ball of string. That is the Buddha's image for the human condition. Not fire, not punishment, not some cosmic injustice. A knot so tangled you cannot see where the threads begin and where they end. And the reason you cannot untangle it is that you are pulling on the wrong threads. Here is what most people miss. Dependent origination is not a theory about how suffering exists in the universe. It is a description of what is happening in your nervous system right now. As you listen to the sentence, the chain is not running somewhere out there. It is running in here, in the space between your ears, faster than you can think about it. Let me show you the first 6 links, not as a list, as your morning. Link 1 of Ija. Not seeing, you wake up. The alarm sounds, and you are not, in that first half second, aware of being aware. You are not seeing clearly. You are in a fog. This is not stupidity. This is the default state of a human mind that has not been trained to see its own machinery. You are conscious, yes, but you are not conscious of the chain. It is already running. Link to Sankara, Sankachara, reactive formations. Before you have a thought, you can put into words. The mind is already reacting. Patterns from yesterday, from last year, from decades of conditioning, they are firing. The impulse to check the phone is not a decision. It is a sankara. A groove worn so deep the mind falls into it the way water falls into a riverbed. Link 3 Vedana, Vijnana, consciousness. Not consciousness in the grand philosophical sense. Consciousness in the smallest sense. Awareness landing on something specific. The screen lights up. Your awareness locks onto it. Out of the 10,000 things you could be aware of in this moment, the warmth of the blanket, the sound of birds, the pressure of your bladder, your consciousness has landed on the phone. It did not ask your permission. Link 4 Namarupa, Namaropa, name and form. Mind and body sync up around the object. Your eyes focus. Your hand adjusts its grip. The mental label arises, not occasions. You are not just seeing a screen anymore. You are seeing a category, a concept, something with meaning attached. Link 5 Salayatana, Salayachatana, the 6 sense bases. The gates are open. Eyes processing light. Fingers feeling glass. The mind registering content. All 6 channels, the 5 physical senses, plus the mind itself, are now feeding data about this object into your system. You are fully engaged with the phone. You have been awake for 11 seconds. Link 6 phasa pasa contact. Sense organ meets object, meets consciousness. The full collision. You see the notification. It is from someone specific. And now, right now, something happens that changes everything. Pay attention to this. Because what happens at link 7 is the reason you keep repeating the same mistakes. It is the reason the Buddha called this teaching the most important thing he ever found. And it is the point where everything you think you know about just being more disciplined falls apart. But before we get to link 7, one more story. A story about a monk on a road, and a single verse that cracked open the mind of the wisest man in the Sangha, Sariputta, who would become the Buddha's chief disciple. The one the Buddha called the marshal of the Dharma, was walking on a road outside Rajagaha, when he saw a monk he did not recognize. The monk was thin, calm, carrying a bowl. Something about the way this man moved stopped Sariputta in his tracks. He asked, "Who is your teacher? And what does he teach?" The monk's name was Asaji. He was one of the original 5 disciples, the first 5 people the Buddha ever taught. And Asaji said something remarkable. He said, "I am new to the training. I cannot give the teaching in full, but I can give you the gist." And the gist was this: of those things that arise from a cause, the Tathagata has told the cause, and also what their cessation is. That is it, one verse. Things arise from causes. The teacher has identified the causes, and he has shown how the arising ceases. Sariputta heard this, and the texts say that the dust-free, stainless eye of the Dharma arose in him right there on the road. Not in a monastery, not after years of practice. On a road, from one sentence about causation, he ran to find his friend Moggallana. He told him the verse. Moggallana understood instantly. Both men went to the Buddha that day. Both became his foremost disciples. Sariputta the wisest, Moggallana the one with the deepest meditative powers. And it started with the gist. The bare mechanism. Things arise because of causes. When you see the causes, you can see the cessation. That is dependent origination. Not as a chart, not as a wheel on a wall. As the reason a single verse on a dusty road could awaken the sharpest mind in India. Now link 7, stay with me. So here is where you are. 6 links deep, and you did not choose a single one of them. Not seeing led to reaction. Reaction led to consciousness landing. Consciousness landing led to mind and body organizing around an object. The sense gates opened. Contact happened. All of it, automatic. All of it. Before you had your first conscious thought of the day. This is the architecture. This is what the Buddha traced under that fig tree. And if you are starting to see your own patterns inside this chain, the scroll, reach the thing you do before you know you are doing it, then you are already closer to the teaching than Ananda was when the Buddha corrected him. But the first 6 links are just the setup. The next 6 are where the damage happens. And one of them, just one, is where the entire machine can be stopped. If this is changing how you see your own mind, hit subscribe. We are about to go into the part of the chain that explains every argument you have had twice, every craving you thought you had beaten, every pattern you swore you were done with. And it starts with a feeling you did not choose. Link 7 Vedana. This is the link the Buddha considered the most important in the entire chain. And it is the one almost everyone skips past. Vedana is usually translated as feeling, but not feeling in the way you use that word. Not emotion, not mood. Something much simpler and much faster. Vedana is the feeling tone. The tag. the instant label that your nervous system places on every single experience, before you have time to think about it, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. That is it, 3 options. Every sight, every sound, every thought, every sensation that passes through your awareness gets one of those 3 tags. And here is the part that changes everything. The tagging happens before you. Before your preferences, before your history, before your personality, before the story you tell yourself about who you are and what you want. You see the notification on your phone. Vedana tags it pleasant, if it is from someone you wanted to hear from. Unpleasant, if it is from someone you are avoiding. Neutral, if it is a software update you do not care about. You did not choose the tag. You did not deliberate. The tag arrived the way a reflex arrives, faster than thought, deeper than intention. And this is where it gets remarkable. Because what happens next, at link 8, is the moment where your entire life pattern gets decided. And you are usually not watching when it happens. Link 8 tanha, craving thirst. The feeling tone lands, and the mind grabs if Vedana tagged the experience as pleasant. Tanha says, more, give me more of this. Don't let this stop. The message from the person you like, you want another one. You want a longer one. You want them to say more. You are already imposing your reply before you have finished reading. If Vedana tagged it as unpleasant, Tanha says, make it stop, push it away. The email from your boss with the subject line that makes your stomach tighten, you want it gone. You want to not have seen it. You close the app. You open a different app. You are looking for something pleasant to replace the unpleasant thing. And you call this scrolling, but the Buddha would call it tanha, the thirst to not feel what you are feeling. If Vedana tagged it as neutral, Tanha says, this is boring. Give me something, anything. The neutral feeling is the one nobody talks about, but it drives more of your behavior than you think. Boredom is not the absence of stimulation. Boredom is tanha, responding to neutral Vedana. The reach for distraction is not laziness. It is the chain running. Here's the part nobody tells you. Vedana is not the problem. You cannot stop Vedana. The Buddha never asked anyone to stop feeling. Feeling tones are part of having a nervous system. They are part of being alive. The pleasant warmth of sunlight on your face, that is Vedana. The unpleasant jolt of stubbing your toe, that is Vedana. These are not mistakes. These are not sins. These are the body doing its job. The problem is the gap, or rather, the absence of the gap between Vedana and tanha. There is a space, a tiny, almost imperceptible space where the feeling has arrived, but the craving has not yet fired. In that space you are free. The tag has landed, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, but the grab has not happened yet. You are feeling without grasping. You are experiencing without needing the experience to be different from what it is. The Buddha's entire project, every meditation technique, every mindfulness practice, every contemplation he taught for 45 years was at its core about one thing: widening that gap, not eliminating feeling, not transcending the body, not floating above human experience in some state of detached bliss. Just seeing the feeling before the grab. That is the whole teaching. Right there, in the space between link 7 and link 8, but most of us have never seen that space because link 8 fires so fast, and we move straight into link 9. Upadana. If tanha is the grab, upadana is the grip that will not let go. Craving says, I want this. Clinging says, I need this. I am a person who needs this. Without this, I am not myself. You can feel the difference. Tanha is the impulse to text your ex at midnight. Upadana is the story you tell yourself at 12. 15. We had something real. No one else understands me the way they did. Maybe I was wrong to leave. That is not just craving anymore. That is identity. You have built a self around the wanting, and that self will fight to survive. This is where patterns harden. This is where a bad habit becomes a personality trait, where a coping mechanism becomes just who I am. The chain has now manufactured a version of you, assembled it from feeling tone and craving and repetition, and that version feels so solid, so real, so obviously, that questioning it feels like a threat, but it was assembled, link by link, which means, and this is what the philosopher Nagarjuna saw 1800 years ago, it can be disassembled. Nagarjuna took the Buddha's teaching on dependent origination and followed it to its logical end. If everything arises dependently, if every link in the chain exists only because the previous link gave rise to it, then nothing in the chain, inherent existence, not the craving, not the clinging, not the self that the clinging builds. It was all assembled from conditions, and what conditions assemble, conditions can take apart. This is not nihilism. Nagarjuna was not saying you do not exist. He was saying you do not exist in the way you think you do, as a fixed, permanent, unchangeable thing. The you that says, I always do this, and I can never change, and this is just how I am, that you was built by the chain, and the chain can be interrupted. The Buddha himself made this point in a teaching that should unsettle you. In the Asuttavasutta, he said something extraordinary. He said it would be better, for an ordinary person to take the physical body as their self than to take the mind as their self. Why? Because the body at least has some stability. It stands for a year, 10 years, 100 years. But the mind, what is called mind? Mentality consciousness arises as one thing and ceases as another. Day and night, the chain is not building a permanent you. It is building a new you over and over, moment by moment, and each one feels like the real one. Each one feels like it has always been there. But it was assembled 30 seconds ago, from a feeling tone you did not choose, and a craving you did not see, and then something unexpected happens. Links 10, 11, 12, becoming, birth and death. Not in the cosmic sense. In the Tuesday afternoon sense, a new pattern is born. It lives for a while, an hour, a day, a relationship, a career built on a self that was assembled from clinging. And then it ends, and the ending is painful. And the pain feeds back into link 1, not seeing, and the whole chain starts again. This is the circle the Buddha saw under the fig tree. Not reincarnation in the way most people imagine it. Something more immediate and more terrifying. You are being reborn into the same patterns, the same reactions, the same arguments, the same reaching hundreds of times a day. And you do not see it, because the chain is faster than your attention, until you learn to watch. Now let's go back to the tree. It is still the middle watch of the night. The air along the Naranjara River is heavy, warm, full of insects. Siddhartha Gautama has been sitting for hours, and he has just seen the chain run forward, all 12 links, from not seeing to death, from death back to not seeing, the circle closing, the wheel turning, the knot tightening with every revolution. He has seen why people suffer. He has seen the machine, but he does not stop there. And this is where the teaching turns. He runs the chain backward, not as a theory, not as a logical exercise. He watches it in his own mind, in real time, disassemble. When this ceases, that ceases. When ignorance ceases, reactive formations cease. When reactive formations cease, consciousness does not land in the old groove. When consciousness does not land, mind and body do not organize around the object. When mind and body do not organize, the sense gates do not lock open. When the sense gates do not lock, contact does not collide. When contact does not collide, feeling tone does not trigger. When feeling tone does not trigger the grab does not happen, link by link backward. The machine, unwinding, and here is what he finds. You do not have to dismantle all 12 links. You do not have to conquer ignorance in some grand, cosmic sense. You do not have to stop your senses from functioning or prevent your mind from making contact with the world. You only have to interrupt the chain at one point, the gap between Vedana and Tanha, between the feeling and the grab. That is it. That is the entire discovery. 2,500 years of Buddhist teaching, 100,000 pages of commentary, 10,000 monasteries, 100 million practitioners. And it comes down to this. The feeling lands. You feel it pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. And then, instead of grabbing, you watch. You do not push the feeling away. You do not chase it. You do not numb it or analyze it or tell yourself a story about it. You just see it. The pleasant thing is pleasant. You know it is pleasant, and you do not reach. The unpleasant thing is unpleasant. You know it is unpleasant, and you do not run. The neutral thing is neutral. You know it is neutral, and you do not scramble for stimulation to fill the gap. This is what the Buddha called sati, mindfulness. Not the word you see on apps and corporate wellness posters. The original thing, bear attention. The willingness to feel what is happening without needing it to be different. And here is the part that should give you hope. The chain does not just run towards suffering. The Buddha taught a second chain in the Upanishad Sutta, where the same architecture runs in the opposite direction. Suffering itself becomes the first link. Not because suffering is good. Because suffering, when it is seen clearly, when you stop running from it and turn toward it and look, gives rise to something. The texts call it saddha, faith. Not faith in a god. Not faith in a religion. Faith that there is a way through. Confidence born from the simple fact that you saw the chain and did not look away, and faith gives rise to joy. Not pleasure, joy. The quiet satisfaction of a mind that has stopped running. And joy gives rise to tranquility, and tranquility to concentration, and concentration to, the texts say, knowledge and vision of things as they really are, the same engine, the same dependent arising, running in reverse, from suffering to freedom, link by link, using the same mechanism that built the prison to build the door. Now watch what happens next. Because the Buddha's map is 25 centuries old, but the neuroscience arrived about 15 years ago, and it confirms exactly what he described. Richard Davidson, a neuroscientist at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, has spent decades studying the brains of experienced meditators, people who have logged 10,000, 20,000, sometimes 50,000 hours of contemplative practice. What his lab found is not mystical. It is mechanical. Experienced meditators show decreased reactivity in the amygdala, the brain's alarm system, the structure that fires, when something threatening or rewarding is detected. But here is the critical point. The meditators were not feeling less. The feeling tone, the Vedana, was still arising. The amygdala still registered the stimulus. What changed was the gap, the space between the registration and the reaction. In experienced meditators, that gap was measurably wider. The feeling arrived. The grab did not follow automatically. There is a quote that is often attributed to Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived Auschwitz and wrote about finding meaning in the most extreme suffering imaginable. The attribution is disputed. Scholars are not sure Frankl actually said it in these exact words. But the idea is this: between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our freedom. In that space is our growth. Whether Frankl said it or not, the Buddha mapped that space 2,500 years before anyone put a meditator inside an fMRI machine. He did not call it freedom. He called it the cessation of tanha. The moment the grab does not fire. The moment the chain, for the first time, does not complete. And in the Nagara Sutta, the Buddha describes this discovery in a way that still stops me. He says he found an ancient path, an ancient road, traveled by the awakened ones of former times. He did not invent dependent origination. He did not create the gap between feeling and craving. He uncovered it. The way an archaeologist brushes dirt from the stones of a city that was always there, buried beneath the surface of the ground you walk on every day. The city was always there. The path was always there. The gap was always there, between your feeling and your grab, between the tag and the reach, between the moment the notification lights up your screen and the moment your thumb starts scrolling. You have just never been shown where to look. So 3 things to carry with you. First, dependent origination is not a cosmological theory about how the universe recycles souls. It is not a chart for monastery walls. It is a moment-by-moment map of how your mind assembles suffering, feeling by feeling, grab by grab, story by story. And it was always meant to be used as a diagnostic tool. The Buddha did not teach it so you could memorize 12 Pali words. He taught it so you could see the machine while the machine is running. Second, the link between Vedana and tanha, between the feeling tone and the craving, is where the chain can be broken. You cannot stop feelings from arising. You will never stop feelings from arising. That was never the point. The point is to see the feeling before the grab, to feel the pleasant without reaching, to feel the unpleasant without running, to feel the neutral without scrambling. Every contemplative tradition that actually works, Buddhist meditation, Stoic self-examination, modern cognitive behavioral therapy, is, in some form, teaching you to widen that gap. They use different languages. They draw different maps, but they are all pointing at the same space. Third, and this is the one I want you to sit with, you are not broken. You are not weak. You are not uniquely flawed for repeating the same mistakes. You are running a chain that every human being who has ever lived has run. A chain that the Buddha himself ran for 29 years before he sat down under a fig tree and traced it to its root. The man who would become the most revered spiritual teacher in human history spent 3 decades caught in the same loops you are caught in right now. The same craving, the same clinging, the same automatic reach for something, anything, to make the feeling stop. The difference between you and the person who stops repeating is not willpower. It is not discipline. It is not some spiritual talent you were born without. It is seeing, just seeing. The chain cannot survive being seen. That is its weakness. That is the flaw in the machine. It runs perfectly in the dark, in avidya, in not seeing. But the moment you turn your attention toward it, the moment you feel the feeling tone, and know you are feeling it, before the hand reaches, before the mouth opens, before the story starts, the chain hesitates. The grab does not fire. And in that hesitation, in that one breath of space, you are, for the first time, free, not forever, not permanently. Freedom is not a place you arrive at and stay. It is a gap you learn to find, again and again, 10,000 times, until finding it becomes as automatic as the chain itself. Which teaching in this video hit you the hardest? Was it the Vedana gap, the space between feeling and craving? Was it Ananda's mistake, thinking he understood when he did not? Or was it something else, something I did not even plan, that landed in your chest while you were listening? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. The Buddha did not ask you to believe in the chain. He did not ask you to join anything, or chant anything, or shave your head. He asked you to watch for it tomorrow morning, when the alarm goes off and your hand reaches for the phone before your eyes are fully open. Just notice, feel the pull, feel the pleasant or the unpleasant or the neutral. And before the grab, just see it. That is link 7, becoming link 8. You do not have to stop it. You do not have to fight it. Just see it. That is where it starts. That is where it always starts.